In the future, the USA is devastated by a massive drought, and water has become so scarce that people are willing to kill for it. While most have left, the Holm family stays behind, because the father, Ernest, believes that if they can get water, the land will recover and plants will grow again. Ernest remembers when the fields were green, but his son Jerome has never seen it that way. One day, two thieves try to break into a small building on Ernest's farm by burning the lock. Ernest catches them in the act and starts shooting, killing one thief when he fires back. The second thief begs for mercy, claiming he heard there was water inside and asks to pee. But when he reaches for his pants, Ernest spots the hidden gun and shoots him too. Jerome witnesses everything from a distance and says he could have helped, but Ernest tells him to stop calling him by his first name and call him Dad instead. Ernest unlocks the building to reveal a water pump, but it's dry, leaving them no choice but to continue without water for their mule. Later, the two meet the Watermen, a group that controls the distribution of water from deep wells under a government deal. Ernest trades supplies for water and warns Jerome not to anger them. They're dangerous and should only be dealt with quickly. Ernest always tries to negotiate for water for his farm, but the prices are too high. On their way back, their mule collapses from exhaustion and gets badly injured. To spare it from suffering, Ernest shoots the animal, leaving Jerome in tears. Jerome insists he could have done it himself. When they return to the farm, Mary, Jerome's sister, serves them MREs for dinner. She washes the dishes with soil, while Ernest listens to the radio, and Jerome draws pictures of animals, one of the few hobbies they have left. That night, Ernest hears a noise and finds that Mary has snuck out through the window to meet her secret boyfriend. The next day, Ernest and Jerome head to Sam's auction house, where they bid on a robot mule called Simulate Shadow, or Sim, to replace their animal. Sam's son, Flem, also bids and competes fiercely, but Ernest wins. This, however, increases his debt even more. Afterward, they visit Catherine, the kid's mother, at the hospital. Catherine was in an accident and can't walk. The hospital has a machine that helps her move using wires, but it's far too expensive for the family to afford. They spend a nice afternoon together before heading home. On the way back, they pass Robbie and Suze, who are with their baby. Ernest dismissively calls them vultures for using their child to gain sympathy and keeps driving. Later, they stop at a gas station, and after filling the tank, Ernest takes a sip from the pump to even out the cost. Ernest takes some water to Robbie and his family, who are struggling badly. The couple has been considering selling their baby because they can't afford to care for him, but Ernest advises them not to and promises to help with water instead. Back at the farm, Flem shows up, revealing he's Mary's secret boyfriend. He asks to borrow Sim and promises to pay rent for it, but Ernest refuses unless Sam signs a guarantee. Flem feels insulted and angrily tells Ernest that he'll never get water for the farm before storming off. Later, Jerome and Ernest meet with the Watermen again. Thanks to Sim, they make the trip faster, and Ernest starts working on convincing the Watermen to consider running a water line to his farm. Afterward, Ernest begins digging up his old pump so the Watermen can see what's already there. While they work, Ernest tells Jerome he needs to get out, meet a girl, or at least make some friends, but Jerome says he'd rather focus on taking care of the family. On the way home, they see Flem speeding by in his truck. Back at the farm, Mary uses a vacuum cleaner with cleaning agents to wash clothes. When Ernest arrives, he forbids her from going out anymore. Mary lashes out, saying she's old enough to do what she wants. She accuses Ernest of hating her late father and claims he loves Flem more than their family. When she tries to run away, she bumps into Jerome and demands money, giving Ernest enough time to catch up and stop her. Mary cries, accusing Ernest of failing their family, but he locks her up and nails her window shut to keep her from sneaking out again. Sometime later, Ernest and Jerome wake up to find Sim has been stolen. Ernest immediately suspects Flem and heads to his house, but Sam tells him that Flem left that morning in a truck headed for the mountains. It's revealed that Ernest's farm used to belong to Sam, and Flem is obsessed with getting back what his family lost, even though Sam thinks the land is useless and water won't help it. Determined to find answers, Ernest goes to the mountains to investigate but is suddenly knocked out. When he wakes up in the evening, he's at the Watermen's camp, where they accuse him of stealing their supplies using Sim. Ernest denies it, but their leader, Caleb, attacks him. A fight breaks out, and after a tough struggle, Ernest manages to steal Caleb's knife and a rifle. He fires a shot in the air to keep the men back, and then escapes while Caleb shouts threats after him. On his way home, Ernest finds Flem sleeping by a fire with Sim and the stolen supplies nearby. It turns out Flem had taken them to frame Ernest. Ernest waits until morning to wake Flem up by pointing the rifle at his face. Then he ties Flem to Sim, which is loaded with the stolen supplies. As they walk under the scorching sun to return everything to the Watermen, Flem keeps mocking Ernest by making comments about Mary. Annoyed, Ernest pulls on the rope to make Flem fall as punishment. Eventually, both Ernest and Flem become too thirsty to go on, and Flem convinces Ernest to stop for a drink. The supplies only have alcohol, not water, and Ernest, unable to resist his addiction, starts drinking heavily. Flem pretends to drink while explaining that he stole Sim because Caleb wanted him dead and he needed the machine to survive. He even offers Ernest money, but Ernest refuses, sensing something is off. When Ernest tries to stand, the alcohol leaves him dizzy and weak, barely able to move. This is exactly what Flem planned. He grabs a rock and hits Ernest in the head, causing him to fall and hit his head on the cliff, leaving him bleeding and unconscious. While out cold, Ernest has a flashback to Catherine's car accident, which had been caused by his drinking. When Ernest wakes up, he finds himself tied to Sim, with Flem pouring more alcohol into his mouth while screaming like a madman. Flem then heads to the farm, where Mary jumps onto his bike, eager to leave with him. Back at the farm, Jerome grows worried about Ernest and decides to go look for him. By nightfall, he finds Sim at the waterman's camp, where the men tell him Ernest died in an accident involving the machine. Later, during the funeral, Mary returns home and the siblings cry together. They visit their mother at the hospital to break the sad news, and that Flem picks them up in his truck and takes them back to the farm. Overwhelmed by anger, Jerome starts smashing Sim with a hammer, but Flem stops him. He talks about how grief is tough, but insists they can't destroy a valuable machine. Flem then offers to take charge of the family and help them move forward. He shocks Jerome by revealing that Mary is pregnant. Flem starts sharing his big plans for the farm, and Jerome agrees to let him try. That afternoon, Flem takes supplies to Caleb and the waterman, asking them to install a water line for the farm. Caleb initially refuses, but Flem shifts the blame for Ernest's death onto Caleb by pointing out that Caleb's rifle and knife were found with the body. Fearing the fallout, Caleb reluctantly agrees to divert water to the farm. A few days later, a new pump is installed, and Flem works tirelessly to plant and grow wheat, watered by the sprinklers. The family now enjoys fresh water, even for showers. Weeks later, Jerome is thrilled to discover a small leaf sprouting from the ground. Over time, the land becomes lush with plants. To celebrate, Flem and Mary get married, tattooing each other's initials on their hands. At the wedding party, Flem drinks and becomes haunted by thoughts of Ernest's death. A few days later, Sam arrives at the farm with two men from the bank, revealing that Ernest left behind a huge debt. They demand Flem pay it. Trying to look intimidating, Flem scares the horses with his bike, but Sam scolds him, explaining that no one ever wanted the land. Ernest had kept it simply because he never left. Thanks to the water and crops, the bank plans to sell the land, so Flem has to pay if he wants to keep it. That night, Flem loads Sim onto his truck and picks up Robbie with his baby. He lies, saying they'll just ask around to get some price ideas, but instead, Flem sells the baby without Robbie's consent. Robbie freaks out and demands his baby back, but the buyers open fire and kill him. They also try to shoot Flem, who fires back as he escapes, leaving Sim behind. Sim gets caught in the crossfire, and the damage activates a mode that makes it return to the original factory. The next day, Flem uses the money from selling the baby to pay the bank, but he lies to the siblings, saying he sold Sim to Robbie. Meanwhile, Sim reaches the city and is found by its builder, Calvin. Calvin tracks down the owner's information and calls the farm. Jerome answers the call and grows suspicious, so he runs to the local market. There, he sees Flem talking to Suze, who is holding a doll and pretending it's her baby. Jerome tries to talk to them, but Flem quickly takes Suze away. Later at the farm, Jerome questions Flem about Robbie. Flem lies again, saying Robbie took Sim and abandoned his family. Determined to find out the truth, Jerome announces he's going to visit his mother, but instead takes a bus to the border. The guards don't let him cross because he's a minor without a guardian. At that moment, Anna approaches him and offers to help him cross for a fee. Jerome agrees, and Anna hides him in a truck full of chickens. After a few hours, the truck reaches the city, which Jerome sees for the first time. He reunites with Anna, who only takes half the money as payment. She explains that the return trip is easy because nobody stops people from leaving the city. Before parting ways, Jerome asks if she ever met someone named Ernest, but Anna says she doesn't know him. Jerome then meets Calvin, who shows him all of Sim's functions. He reveals that Sim's eyes are cameras designed to record slopes for reforestation, and they've captured everything Sim has seen. Calvin teaches Jerome how to access the footage and gives him privacy. Jerome gets emotional as he watches videos of his dad, but his sadness turns to horror when he learns Flem murdered Ernest. The footage shows Flem tying Ernest to the machine and sending it toward the waterman's camp, making it seem like Sim malfunctioned and accidentally dragged Ernest to his death. Jerome has a complete breakdown in Calvin's office. That evening, it rains on the farm for the first time in over a decade. When Jerome returns, he acts normal and casually asks Flem how he got Sim back. Flem looks confused and heads to the barn, shocked to see Sim standing there with no damage. He assumes Robbie must have returned it out of guilt. A few days later, Jerome visits Catherine for real this time and promises to take care of her, just like Ernest did. One afternoon, Flem and Jerome go hunting to keep animals away from the crops. Flem misses every shot and hands the rifle to Jerome, blaming the gun for his poor aim. Jerome, tempted to shoot Flem, instead kills a deer to prove the gun works fine, and the problem is Flem. When they return home, Jerome secretly hides the rifle in his room. During lunch, Jerome casually mentions getting a call from Robbie, who said he's looking for Flem. This rattles Flem, and he accuses Jerome of lying. Mary scolds Flem for his outburst, and Jerome insists he's telling the truth, which causes Flem to storm out of the room. The next day, Flem receives a letter that Jerome forged, pretending to be Robbie. The letter asks Flem to meet him at the cliffs, claiming he's in trouble. Before leaving, Flem looks for the rifle, but Jerome says he sent it to the shop for repairs since Flem complained it wasn't working. Not wanting to raise suspicion, Flem goes along with the story and apologizes for his behavior at lunch. After grabbing a knife, Flem takes Sim and heads to the cliffs. At the cliffs, Flem calls out for Robbie but suddenly falls into a hidden pit, breaking his legs. He screams in pain and begs Sim for help, but the machine doesn't understand. That's when Jerome shows up, silently staring at Flem with a rock in his hand. Flem realizes that Jerome knows the truth. Desperate, Flem begs for mercy, but Jerome continues to watch him suffer under the burning sun. Flem starts pleading again, urging Jerome to think of Mary and the baby. He launches into a long speech about accidents and regret, which only makes Jerome angrier. Overcome with rage, Jerome finally shoots Flem, killing him. When Jerome returns home, he lets Mary believe Flem abandoned her and doesn't reveal the truth about Ernest's death. With the money from the crops, they can now afford real food and decide to buy the machine so Catherine can live with them. Finally, Jerome erases all the footage from Sim, ready to move forward and start over. Don't forget to subscribe. Here's some more interesting story you don't want to miss.